The forum thread was never meant to be anything more than a place for stressed-out students to complain the night before midterms. But as the clock pushed past midnight, something about the silence of the campus made the posts feel heavier, almost desperate. I stared at the glowing screen in my dimly lit dorm room, the only source of light left after my roommate went home for the weekend. Outside my window, the quad was empty, the kind of empty that made you feel like the whole world had slipped into a different dimension. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to stay awake, scrolling through strangers' confessions as if they held answers to fears I hadn't admitted yet. The thread started normally, jokes about procrastination, pictures of messy desks, mini rants about professors. But then one user posted, "What's the scariest thing that ever happened to you on campus?" And everything shifted. Comments began pouring in, not funny or exaggerated, but uneasy. Raw. People spoke about shadows in stairwells, hall lights turning off by themselves, someone knocking on dorm doors at exactly 3 a.m. and vanishing before anyone could check the peephole. It didn't feel like storytelling. It felt like everyone had been waiting for someone else to bring it up first. I kept scrolling even as my chest tightened. There was a weight behind the words, a kind of trembling honesty that made my skin prickle. It reminded me of the feeling you get in an empty classroom when the air suddenly feels colder, like something unseen just walked past you. One post in particular caught my attention. These stories, they happen more often than you think. Different schools, same pattern. No one replied to it. Maybe they didn't want to believe it. Maybe they already knew it was true. As I read further, 4 posts began standing out from the rest, longer, more detailed, written with a kind of urgency that made it hard to look away. Each one described an experience so vivid it felt like the writer was reliving it with every sentence. One talked about being trapped in a locked study room. Another described a roommate who never slept. The third centered on an elevator ride that shouldn't have been possible. And the last recounted a man sitting in the back row of an empty music hall, watching. Not one of them sounded like they were trying to impress anyone. Something strange happened as I scrolled back up. The timestamps on the 4 posts were almost identical, only seconds apart, even though the users claimed to be from different campuses miles away. I didn't catch it at first, the detail was so small, tucked between usernames and reply counts. But once I noticed it, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight. It felt wrong, like these weren't just coincidences but pieces of something bigger threading itself together at the edges of the night. The quiet around me grew heavier, pressing against my ears. It was the kind of silence you only hear when a building is asleep. I could hear the faint hum of the hallway lights outside my door, buzzing in an almost rhythmic pattern. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps too, slow, dragging, but when I listened harder, they stopped. I told myself it was just someone on the floor above mine, but I didn't truly believe it. My screen dimmed for a second, and the reflection of my own face flickered in the glass. I looked tired, unsettled, like someone who had just read a warning without realizing it. A notification popped up from the thread, new message added. My heart kicked harder than it should have for something so simple. I clicked it anyway, my fingers cold. The post was short, only 5 words, "They're not stories. They follow." The comment was deleted a moment later, replaced with a system message saying the user's account no longer existed. I stared at the blank space where it had been, my throat tightening. The campus outside remained silent, but something about it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something was watching. The first story appeared in the thread just as the chill in my room deepened, as if someone had opened a window I couldn't see. The user's profile picture was blank, their username a string of numbers that looked auto-generated. Their post began calmly enough, complaints about an overdue assignment, a joke about surviving on vending machine snacks, before it shifted into something else. They wrote about a night last semester when they stayed late in their campus library, cramming for an exam they were sure they would fail. It was almost midnight, the building nearly empty, and they slipped into a small glass study room on the 2nd floor to finish a problem set. They remembered feeling relieved when the last group of students packed up and left, leaving the library in silence. They described the moment the lights outside the study room began turning off one by one, starting from the far end of the hall. At first, they thought nothing of it, the janitors often shut down sections to save energy. But the way the darkness crept closer felt intentional, synchronized, like someone was counting their steps in the shadows. The user wrote that they tried to focus on their notes, but the hairs on their arms kept rising, as if the air temperature was slowly dropping. When the lights directly outside their room flickered once, then died, they felt something tighten in their chest. Through the glass walls, they could see nothing but the computer glow reflecting back at them. They tried to ignore the sudden weight of isolation, but then a shape appeared in the reflection, tall, unmoving, blocking part of the hallway behind them. The user insisted they didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear the door open, nothing. Just the shape materializing in the darkness. Thinking it was a security guard doing rounds, they glanced back over their shoulder, but the hallway was pitch black. They turned back to the reflection, and the shape was still there. Their fingers trembled as they continued typing the story, describing how they froze, unable to decide if they should leave the study room or lock the door. The shape didn't move, it stayed in the exact same spot, its form sharper in the glass than in reality. They tried calling campus security, but the call wouldn't connect. Every attempt went straight to static, as if their phone had lost signal inside a building with full bars. The user said the shape finally stepped closer, not in the real hallway, but only in the reflection. It leaned forward slightly, like it was studying the back of their head through the glass. In the actual hallway behind them, there was still nothing but darkness. They wrote that they couldn't breathe, that something primal told them not to turn around again. The air felt thick, charged, and they swore they heard faint breathing, but it seemed to come from inside the study room, not outside. When they couldn't take it anymore, they slammed their books into their bag, kept their eyes fixed on the floor, and rushed out of the room without looking up. They ran past the dark hallway, down the stairs, and out into the cold air of the quad. Only once they reached the dorms did they dare to look behind them, and for a second, they saw a tall silhouette standing inside the library's second-floor window, exactly where their study room had been. It didn't move until they blinked, and then it was gone. The user ended the post with a final line that made my stomach twist. The next morning, security said no staff were working that night. And the footage from the second floor suddenly corrupted. The moment I finished reading, the thread refreshed on its own, and another long post began loading beneath it. Another confession, another story waiting to unfold. The next story appeared almost immediately after the first one ended, as if the writer had been waiting for someone else to break the silence. Their username was simple this time, just J, and their post began with an apology for how strange their experience might sound. They claimed it happened during their second semester, when they were assigned a new roommate after their previous one dropped out unexpectedly. The new roommate was quiet, polite, academically gifted, someone who made almost no noise and left almost no trace. At first, Jay thought they'd lucked out. But the first night told a different story. Jay remembered waking up at exactly 3:07 a.m. to a soft whispering sound. At first, they thought it was a dream. But when they opened their eyes, they saw the silhouette of their roommate sitting at the desk, facing the wall. His posture was stiff, like he was afraid to move. His breath came out shaky, almost uneven, and the whispering grew clearer, fast, hushed, repetitive, like someone praying under their breath. Jay couldn't make out the words, only the desperation. When Jay called his name, the whispering stopped instantly, but the roommate didn't turn around. He just said, in a low voice, "I can't sleep. If I do, he'll come back." Jay tried asking who he was, but the roommate refused to speak further, only rocking slightly in his chair until sunrise. The next night, the same thing happened. And the night after that, every time the clock struck 3 a.m., the roommate would sit frozen at his desk, eyes locked on the wall, whispering to someone Jay couldn't see. Jay began to dread falling asleep, afraid of what might happen if both of them were unconscious at the same time. One night, Jay decided to stay awake and observe. They pretended to sleep but kept their eyes half open. At 3:04 a.m., the roommate suddenly jolted upright, as if something had grabbed him in his dreams. He stared at the corner of the room, the darkest one, where the shadow pooled, and whispered, "Not tonight. Please, not tonight." Then he began crying silently, shoulders shaking, but never looking away from that corner. Jay wrote that the room felt colder, the way it does when someone opens a freezer door behind you. Jay admitted they eventually broke the silence and shook the roommate's shoulder. The moment they did, the roommate gasped like he had been underwater too long. He clung to Jay's arm, whispering, "Don't let him take me again." When Jay asked who he meant, the roommate finally looked directly into Jay's eyes, and that was the first time Jay realized how bloodshot and sunken they were, like he hadn't slept in weeks. The next morning, when Jay returned from class, the roommate was gone. All his things were still neatly arranged on his side of the room, textbooks stacked, bed perfectly made, clothes folded. Nothing was missing except the roommate himself. The school later claimed he had withdrawn due to personal reasons, but when Jay asked for details, the administration became strangely defensive, insisting they had no information beyond a single unsigned form. Jay ended the story by mentioning the part that haunted them most. A week after the disappearance, Jay woke up at 3:06 a.m. out of nowhere. The room was silent, but when they looked toward the desk, the chair was pulled out, slightly angled toward the wall, just like how their roommate had left it. And in the darkest corner of the room, Jay thought they saw something shift, just a fraction, as if retreating when noticed. The final line of the post appeared slowly, each word typed with pauses in between. He never slept because something was watching him, and I think it knows I'm alone now. The third story loaded slowly, as if the forum itself hesitated to show it. The username belonged to a medical student from a campus known for its strict scheduling and late-night practical sessions. They wrote that exhaustion had become a normal part of their life, leaving the lab long after most students had gone to bed, crossing the dim courtyard alone, relying on vending machine coffee to survive. One night, after a grueling dissection exam, they returned to their dorm building around 1:45 a.m., too tired to take the stairs. The building was old, the kind where every elevator ride felt like a gamble, but fatigue pushed them inside anyway. They pressed the button for the fourth floor and leaned back against the wall, letting their eyelids drift shut for a moment. When the elevator jerked downward instead of rising, their eyes snapped open. The display panel flickered, showing no number at all, just a blank light. The doors didn't open at the ground floor. Instead, the elevator continued descending, slow and heavy, deeper than the building should allow. The student tried pressing every button, but nothing responded. The only sound was the faint hum of machinery and the strange sensation that the air around them was getting colder with each passing second. They wrote that the elevator finally stopped with a soft thud, smoother than any normal landing, and the doors slid open to complete darkness. At first, they thought it was a mistake, maybe a maintenance level they had never heard of. But the building map clearly stated, no basement. The student stepped forward cautiously, peering into the darkness, and that was when they heard it. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, steady. Not their own. It came from just beyond the reach of the elevator light, as if someone was standing inches away, waiting for them to step out. The student tried calling out, asking if anyone was there, but their voice echoed in a way that made the space feel impossibly large. They panicked and slammed the door close button, but the doors refused to shut. The breathing grew louder, raspy, almost curious, like whoever was out there was leaning closer. The student backed away until their spine pressed against the cold metal wall of the elevator. Their fingers shook as they pressed the emergency alarm, but it emitted only a weak buzz, barely audible. Then something shifted in the darkness, a faint scrape on the floor, like a bare foot dragging across concrete. Finally, the doors began closing at a painfully slow pace. As they narrowed, the breathing on the other side intensified, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there realized it was being shut out. Just as the gap became a sliver, a pale shape slid into view, a hand, or something shaped like one, reaching toward the narrowing light. The doors sealed shut before it could enter, plunging the elevator into a trembling silence. The student wrote that they stood frozen, heart pounding, until the elevator began climbing upward on its own, stopping at the fourth floor as if nothing had happened. When they stumbled out into the hallway, drenched in cold sweat, everything seemed normal again. The lights were warm, the floors quiet, the building eerily calm. They ran straight to the night security office, demanding answers, but the guards looked confused. According to their system, the elevator had never left the first floor. There were no recorded movements, no logs, not even a flicker of electrical error. The student insisted on checking camera footage, but the basement level didn't exist in any blueprint, and the elevator had no cameras inside. The post ended with a trembling confession: the elevator still sometimes takes longer than usual to arrive at their call. Sometimes, when the doors open, the lights inside flicker softly, as if someone has just stepped out. The student wrote that now they always take the stairs, no matter how tired they are. But every so often, when passing the elevator shaft late at night, they hear it. Just one faint breath from below, rising through the cracks like a memory refusing to die. Their final sentence felt like a whisper meant only for those who stayed up too late reading. If there truly is no basement, then whatever I heard wasn't supposed to be under the building at all. The fourth story appeared after a long pause, as if the forum needed to breathe before revealing it. Unlike the others, this one didn't begin with an introduction or an apology. It started with a single sentence typed in a shaky, uneven pattern: "Music halls are never truly empty." The username belonged to a freshman violinist in the university orchestra, someone who often stayed late to practice in one of the older performance buildings. They wrote that the hall itself was beautiful in daylight: arched ceilings, polished wooden seats, the faint smell of varnish and dust, but at night, the space transformed. Every sound echoed too long, every shadow stretched too far, and the stage lights humming overhead felt almost like whispers. One evening, after a stressful rehearsal, the student decided to return alone to the hall to practice a difficult section before an upcoming concert. They entered around 9:40 p.m., expecting at least a janitor or technician to be nearby, but the building was silent. They set their case on the stage, tuned their violin, and began playing slowly, letting the notes drift into the hollow darkness. The acoustics were perfect, too perfect, as though the hall itself was listening. The student mentioned that they felt watched, but chalked it up to nerves. Midway through a passage, they heard something soft, a seat creaking in the audience. They froze immediately. The hall seats were old, prone to shifting under weight, but the sound came from the back row, a place they couldn't see clearly from the stage. They called out, asking if someone was there, but their voice echoed back, distorted by the vastness of the room. They waited, breath held tight, before convincing themselves it was just the building settling. They resumed playing, but the notes wavered with the tremor in their hands. That's when the breathing started. It was faint at first, barely audible, yet unmistakably human, slow, steady, coming from the darkness beyond the last row of seats. The student stopped mid-bow, the last note hanging in the air. The breathing did not stop. It seemed to grow louder, as though whoever sat there was leaning forward, elbows on knees, listening intently. The stage lights flickered slightly, and when they steadied, the student swore the silhouette of a figure was now visible in the back row. Still, upright, watching, fear rooted them in place. They wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but their body refused to move. The figure did nothing, didn't stand, didn't wave, didn't speak. It only listened. The student's trembling hand brushed a string accidentally, producing a sharp, dissonant sound. The breathing paused, and then it changed, becoming ragged, uneven, almost excited, as though the sound had stirred something in it. The student backed away slowly, their footsteps echoing across the stage. They couldn't take their eyes off the silhouette. When they reached the wings, the stage lights suddenly dimmed, plunging the hall into near darkness except for the faint glow of emergency lights. In that low light, the silhouette was no longer seated. It was standing, tall, blurry, as though its outline wasn't fully solid. It faced the stage directly, its posture rigid, like someone preparing to step forward. The student fled, leaving their violin case behind. They sprinted through the hallways, the air thick with a pressure that felt almost physical, as though something followed just out of sight. They didn't stop running until they burst out into the cold night air. After notifying security, they returned with 2 officers. The hall, once unlocked and quiet, was now sealed, and inside, everything was normal. The case still rested on the stage, untouched. All the seats were empty. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No shadows that didn't belong. The student ended their post with a revelation that made my skin crawl. A month earlier, a former music major had gone missing after a late-night rehearsal. His last known location was the same hall. The only thing left behind was his violin, sitting quietly in the back row. The freshman's final words were written as though they were afraid someone else was reading over their shoulder. When I see the empty seats now, I can't help wondering which one is his. And whether he ever left. The thread didn't end there. After the fourth story, the page refreshed on its own, something it had been doing since the first confession, but this time, the layout of the forum looked subtly different. The timestamps were out of order, user icons missing, and the background color seemed darker than before. At the very bottom, a new post appeared without a username, as if someone, or something, had bypassed the normal posting system entirely. The text loaded letter by letter, like fingers trembling over a keyboard. It began by describing how all four stories, the library reflection, the sleepless roommate, the basement elevator, and the music hall spectator, had been circulating around the campus for years, whispered between freshmen during orientation, repeated by seniors during late-night study sessions. Most people treated them as folklore, exaggerated tales meant to scare newcomers. But the anonymous poster claimed there was something everyone ignored: the fact that all four locations were connected underground by maintenance tunnels built decades ago, long before the university expanded. According to the post, only a few older staff members still knew those tunnels existed. The writer described their job as a student assistant in the facilities department, where they were tasked with cataloging old building schematics. One night, while digging through dust-covered archives, they found several outdated maps that showed a hidden network directly linking the library, the dormitories, the old performance hall, and the central elevator shaft. None of these tunnels appeared on modern blueprints. When they asked their supervisor about it, he looked startled for a moment before dismissing the findings as obsolete plans from renovations that never happened. But the student didn't believe him. And when they noticed that the disappearances mentioned in the previous stories lined up with the tunnels' intersections, curiosity pushed them deeper. They wrote that they made the mistake of visiting one of the rumored tunnel entrances late at night, a rusted metal door behind the east wing of the library. It was supposed to be sealed, but when they pulled, the lock snapped clean off, as though it had already been weakened from the inside. A cold draft drifted out, carrying a scent they described as damp concrete mixed with something metallic, something wrong. With only their phone flashlight, they descended a narrow staircase leading underground. The deeper they went, the more they felt the walls closing in, the air thickening. They heard faint sounds, soft thuds, distant scraping, and at one point, what sounded like someone whispering in a familiar, panicked cadence. They recognized the voice too late. It matched the roommate described in the second story, the one who vanished without formal withdrawal. The whispering came from further down the tunnel, pleading, repeating the same words over and over: "Don't let him take me again." Fear spiked through them, but they continued forward until the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Their flashlight flickered, catching glimpses of strange markings on the walls, distorted handprints smeared in patterns that looked too deliberate to be random. In the far corner of the chamber, something shifted in the darkness. Not a silhouette, not a shadow, but the suggestion of movement, like a person standing just outside the beam of light. The writer tried speaking, asking who was there, but the figure didn't answer. Instead, it inhaled deeply, one slow breath that echoed like it came from somewhere far bigger than a human chest. The student stumbled backward, dropping their phone. The flashlight spun, casting wild arcs of light across the chamber. In those split seconds, the beam passed over the floor, and they saw multiple objects scattered across the concrete: a violin bow, a missing student's ID card, the torn strap of a backpack. Proof that the stories weren't just stories. Proof that the tunnels were the connective tissue of something that watched, waited, and wandered beneath the campus. The post ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if the writer had been cut off. If any of you have ever heard breathing where it shouldn't be, if you've ever felt watched when. After that, no more text appeared. The page froze. The entire thread vanished an hour later. And by the next morning, The user's account no longer existed. The thread returned on its own at 3:07 a.m., the same time the sleepless roommate used to wake each night. No users were online, no moderators, and yet a new post appeared, marked only by a blank profile picture and a timestamp that flickered unnaturally, as if the system struggled to acknowledge it. The message began by claiming that the previous post, the one cut off mid-sentence, was only half the truth. The anonymous writer said they weren't the original poster, but someone who had found their abandoned phone at the edge of the maintenance tunnels, screen cracked, flashlight still on, recording a video that ended with a burst of static and a single terrified gasp. They explained that after finding the phone, they tried to report it to campus security. But the guard on duty reacted strangely. He locked the door behind them, lowered his voice, and asked exactly where the phone had been found. When the student described the tunnel entrance, the guard grew pale, muttered something about, "Not again," and told them to leave immediately. But when the student turned around to exit, the hallway behind them had gone dark, as though someone had cut the power just in that one wing. The guard urged them to stay inside the office, locking the door and drawing the blinds. That was the moment the student realized the guard wasn't protecting himself, he was protecting them. From inside the office, they heard it, a faint scraping sound traveling along the corridor outside, slow and deliberate. Every few seconds, it paused, as if listening. The guard whispered that the tunnels weren't just passageways, they were conduits. "It moves between them," he said. "It always has." When pressed about what it was, the guard shook his head, refusing to explain, only saying that every few years, the campus lost a student to the dark. Not missing, lost, as if taken somewhere no search team could ever reach. The scraping stopped directly outside the office door. The metal shuddered softly, like fingertips, or something shaped like fingertips, drumming against it. Then came the breathing, slow at first, then shifting into something hungrier, heavier, resonating like a distorted echo from a cavern beneath the building. The student wrote that the guard silently motioned for them to stay low, crouching behind the desk. For a full minute, the thing outside only breathed. Then the handle began to turn. Gently, carefully, as if testing the lock. The guard clutched his walkie-talkie, but it emitted nothing but static. The handle stopped moving. Silence flooded the room, and then, above them, came a soft tap 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 on the ceiling tiles. The student said the sound crawled across the ceiling like a set of hands, moving unnaturally fast. Dust rained from the edges of the tiles. A low moan vibrated through the vents, a voice stretched thin like something mimicking a human sound but getting it terribly wrong. The guard, trembling, whispered that it rarely left the tunnels, that it usually only surfaced when it had followed someone back. After several agonizing minutes, the noise faded. The guard radioed for backup, voice shaking, but no one responded. He insisted on escorting the student back to their dorm. As they walked through the dark corridors, the student glanced behind them and saw a long shadow at the end of the hall, one that didn't match either of their bodies. It remained perfectly still, watching. Only when they reached the exit doors did the shape slowly withdraw, melting into the floor as though sinking back underground. The final paragraphs of the post were the most chilling. The student wrote that when they returned to their dorm room later that night, they found something waiting outside their door, a torn sheet of paper from the missing student's notebook, smeared with dust and symbols matching the markings described in the tunnels. Scrawled on the paper in shaking handwriting were 4 words, "Don't go down again." But beneath it, written in a darker, heavier ink that looked almost wet, were 3 more, "He already knows." The last line of the post came minutes later, posted separately, as if the student hesitated before submitting it. The breathing, "It followed me to the stairwell just now. I'm not opening my door." The night swallowed her scream before it ever reached the stairwell. For a moment, everything went impossibly still. No flickering lights, no rattling vents, no dragging footsteps from the unseen thing that had been hunting her since the elevator doors opened. Tessa pressed her back against the cold cinder block wall, gasping for breath, her fingers trembling as they smeared sweat across her phone screen. The battery icon blinked red, mocking her. She tried to dial campus security again, but the call refused to connect, dissolving into static that sounded disturbingly like someone whispering her name. She bit down hard on her lip, forcing herself not to cry. Crying would echo. Echoing would draw it closer. She inched along the wall, one shoe scraping lightly against the dusty floor. The stairwell door loomed ahead, heavy, rusted, and half open as though someone stronger than her had torn it that way. Warm air seeped through the crack, carrying the faint scent of perfume she recognized. Mia's perfume, the same flowery sweetness she had smelled hours earlier, right before Mia vanished from the hallway outside the elevator. A tremor rippled through her chest, but she pushed herself forward, fingertips brushing the metal door, nudging it just enough to slip through. It groaned, the sound stretching long and low like an animal exhaling. Tessa froze, listening. Silence answered. The stairwell was darker than the hallway. Too dark. Even the emergency bulbs flickered at barely a fraction of their normal brightness, casting trembling shadows along the rails. She lifted her phone, using the last dim bar of light to map out the first few steps. Something wet glistened on the concrete. A smear. A drag mark. It trailed downward in uneven streaks, vanishing around the bend. Her breath hitched when her shoe brushed a sticky edge. She didn't want to know what it was. She forced herself not to look down. A soft thump echoed from below. Then another. The rhythm was wrong for footsteps. Too slow, too heavy, like something being dropped, lifted, then dropped again. Each dull impact vibrated up the railing beneath her palm. Tessa sucked in a shaky breath, and slipped her hand away from the rail, clinging instead to the wall as she crept downward. The air grew warmer, thicker, almost humid, as though she were descending into a basement boiler room rather than the second floor. Halfway down the next flight, she found Mia's phone. It lay on the step like it had been placed there intentionally, screen down, case cracked. Tessa knelt slowly, afraid to disturb anything, and turned it over with her fingertip. The screen lit up instantly. No password. A single notification glowed at the top. Basement, come alone. Sent from an unknown number. Time stamped 5 minutes earlier. Tessa's stomach dropped. That meant whatever, took Mia wasn't far ahead. A sudden scraping sound jolted her upright. The lights flickered violently, strobing the stairwell in brief flashes and revealing something just beyond the bend of the next flight, a shape. Tall, crooked, leaning against the wall like a silhouette waiting to be fully born from the dark. Tessa's breath stopped. She couldn't see its face, but she felt its attention clamp onto her like a cold hand around her throat. Her fingers clenched around both phones as she backed up a step, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her teeth. The shape twitched, not forward, sideways, boneless, unnatural, as though its joints didn't belong in any human arrangement. She stumbled another step backward, her heel catching the edge. The creature moved again, faster this time, jerking toward the stairs with a shuddering, broken rhythm that made her legs go weak. She turned and ran. Every step hammered through her body, every breath tore at her lungs, every flicker of the emergency lights carved new shadows that seemed to reach for her ankles. She didn't look back, not even when she heard the thing scramble up the stairs behind her, claws dragging against concrete, breath rattling like someone drowning inches from her ear. She burst through the stairwell door at the next landing, slamming her shoulder into the frame as she forced it closed behind her. The door thudded shut, metal trembling from the force of the creature hitting the opposite side. The hallway she stumbled into was empty. Silent. Too silent. Tessa sagged against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the cold floor, both phones still clutched tight in her shaking hands. The creature growled behind the door, low and frustrated, the metal vibrating under its weight. Then the sound faded, steps retreating downward, toward the basement. It wasn't giving up, it was waiting.